Hi, this is Ashley, and I'm here to talk about my second garden reflection for ENS 392, Section 1A, Sustainable Agriculture. Yeah. So this reflection covers almost an entire month, starting on September 29th and ending on October 27th. During this time, the temperature began to gradually decline from the mid to upper 70s in September to the mid 50s in October. I believe it was this week that we had applied fertilizer to our crops to aid in building nutrients in the soil and promoting plant growth for our crops. And I applied an organic granular fertilizer to mine, one that had an even ratio between nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. I chose this because of the variety of plants that I had planted, and at this point I was really hoping to get a growth spurt specifically for my lettuce and my radishes. So there weren't any major weather events to my knowledge, but we did receive our first frost on October 5th. Luckily, our plants recovered, and the majority lived to see the next couple of weeks. The fertilizer and perhaps a little extra rainfall helped to kickstart my plants' growth exactly as I'd hoped. And the nitrogen in the fertilizer did wonders for my lettuce, and the balanced ratio seemed to work really well for my radishes as well. My nasturtium grew a few extra arms, and my mums continued to very brightly flourish as well, so I was really satisfied with that. And much of the same can be said for the next week. My radishes were giving me more and more hope that they'd be ready to harvest before our class stopped coming to the SAP. And many of my classmates were about ready to start harvesting their own radishes. It turns out that the variant I had chosen had a longer germination time, which explained their late bloom in comparison to the radishes that were growing in my classmates' plots. All the while, I had been noticing little holes in some of my lettuce and radish leaves, but they were very far and few in between, and there was never really any evidence of cabbage worms or beetles around my plants. So I didn't really do anything to remedy this problem because most of the leaves were intact and it didn't seem to be inhibiting any plant growth. And without actually seeing the bugs myself, I wasn't really sure what I was dealing with. So it didn't seem like too big of a problem anyway. And then in the final week, there were a few lettuce leaves that were ready to harvest, though none of my radishes were ready, unfortunately. I was really sad about this, but ultimately it was cool just to know that I was capable of successfully growing a plant from a seed. And my mums began closing their flowers during this week, and it looked like someone or something had trampled my nasturtium, which was fine. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed this. So for the personal question that I've decided to answer, I chose how did the garden project make me feel? How did I handle my emotional reactions, and do I believe that I should have felt differently than I did? So I found a lot of peace in coming to this class and taking care of my plot. I enjoyed the pace of it, and it was an opportunity for me to briefly forget any stress that I was feeling and really focus on the earth and the life that was taking place right in front of me. I imagine that the good feelings that I had reflected in the way that I treated my classmates. You know, like we always shared materials with each other, and there was not a single soul around me that wasn't kind or happy to help each other. And maybe that's because we were all in a garden together, but who knows? You know, I don't know. I don't believe I should have felt differently because in my heart, I think that this activity and tending to the earth and being the hand that helps to make plants grow is ingrained in the fabric of humanity and is a large part of our purpose and duty on earth. Robin Wall Kimmerer mentions this in her book Braiding Sweetgrass, and since I read this book, it's never left me. So in my eyes, it was really only natural that I felt a great amount of peace and comfort in partaking in this project. Really, it reminded me that I needed to do it more often. So, and then for my civic question, what changes does the gardening project suggest are needed within an organization, a group, society, or generally, and how can these things be accomplished? So, I think that the gardening project suggests that we need radical, sustainable change in the way that we grow, process, and distribute food in our communities. After growing my little plot of crops using the materials and methods provided in this class, It became very evident how much food is possible to grow in limited spaces with the right nutrients and practices applied, the right conditions, of course. And then using the single stretch of land provided for our class at the SAP, it just made me think that, come summer, there'd be plenty of crops available to feed a number of families from this one piece of land alone. And this was evident based on the amount of success my classmates and I had with our own plots. There was very little labor or space required, and only careful attention and occasional watering and nutrient application, maybe a little pest management. But this is in direct opposition to our current food systems, where we reserve thousands of acres of land to produce monocultures of crops that do not sufficiently feed our communities, despite the emphasis placed by our economy on producing high yields. So, with as much space as we've dedicated to agriculture, there really should not be food insecurity in this country, yet marginalized communities around the world or around the country either face food insecurity or, in the case of indigenous communities, are under state and food apartheid. And the prices of healthy foods are higher in the limited case where they do have access to it. So the way our society approaches agriculture is starving not only our people, but the land of biodiversity and nutrition as well. Not only this, but the application of pesticides and herbicides is poisoning our soil. We need to change our relationship with food in this country for these reasons, and become less reliant on fast food and large supermarkets, and begin growing food to sustain ourselves, our community, and the land that sustains us. And if there is enough collective action in this way, we could send a very strong message to our leaders that we want better for ourselves and the land that we inhabit. And I think where we spend our dollars also has a lot of power. So investing our money into companies that promote sustainable agriculture and or support our local communities could be a great way to target this problem. Reorganizing our cities to create access for community gardens is another way to change our relationship with food, and to help create relationships with our neighbors as well. And, of course, petitioning and putting pressure on our politicians is a vital step in making the change that we need. So, yeah. And then finally, academic, what similarities and differences are there between the perspective in your coursework and the gardening project? On a semi-unrelated note, one of the main differences between my other coursework and the gardening project is the hands-on application that I had been missing from my other classes. It's one thing to be told about how to create sustainable habits and practices, but to actually do the work and make the connections through trial and error was incredibly beneficial to my learning experience. Perspective-wise, all of my ENS classes have shared very similar themes and approaches, as people and planet are always at the forefront of our priorities, with what I've considered to be pretty light discussions, that include economical factors. So Indigenous and Black perspectives are very highly valued among all my classes. And my main focus area for my major is water resources, so a majority of my classes have been more focused on water quality and water ecology. And this was the first class I've taken where agriculture and food systems were the key focus of discussion and activities, so it's been delightful to learn more about it. So I'd say I put an adequate amount of time into the garden project. I was more successful than I thought I'd be with the limited amount of time that I was able to spend with my plot. I was present for every class session, though I rarely visited it outside of class, aside from checking on my composter. But when I was present, I paid very close attention to my plants. So, did I learn something new? Yeah, because I learned how to garden sustainably. I grew up gardening with my dad, and I love him to death, but he was not always very eco-friendly. And now I've had experience using organic materials and methods that don't involve harmful chemicals or unearthing the soil. I learned about which nutrients are best depending on the plant and its attributes, and how to check for signs of disease and nutrient deficiency. And again, the hands-on experience, incredibly useful. I don't have any specific questions, but I'd like to learn more about the different uses of various plants, whether that be different ways I can eat them or use them for medicinal purposes, and how I can become more self sufficient by utilizing a garden or a yard that contains a food forest. I want to know more about canning and food preservation and what I can do to help feed my community during seasons where I have an abundance. I don't enjoy being reliant on supermarkets, and I believe that one of the main ways I can create sustainable practices in my own life is by finding natural and safe alternatives that I can grow in my own garden, that could replace a lot of the things that I buy from the store. So I would investigate questions such as like what plants or what variants grow best in the sunlight conditions in my own yard. I have a very shaded yard, which isn't ideal for most plants as they need some level of sunlight in order to photosynthesize. So are there variants that can grow in a heavily shaded yard, or will I have to clear trees or find alternative spaces? How do I know how much water I should be giving my plants, and what are the proper and least harmful methods of harvest? These are questions that will likely be answered with time as I become more familiar with different plants and their unique conditions. But ultimately, my questions don't have one answer. So, I'd like to investigate different plant families, their unique attributes, and the conditions that each of them need in order to thrive. And then, yeah, these are my references. So, thank you so much. I'm sorry that this is late. Got a little overwhelmed last week, but I wanted to try my best. So, all right, have a great day.